More than 1 in 7 American children gets diagnosed with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
There's important news tonight for parents of children diagnosed with ADHD. A new study found that kids who receive behavioral therapy before medication fared much better in their development.
Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. It's estimated that around 500,000 children in the UK have the condition, but the majority, as with Rory, go undiagnosed.
Rory Bremner is patron of the ADHD Foundation. He is here now. Morning to you, Rory.
Hello.
You were watching those children really closely, weren't you?
It's heartbreaking, isn't it, really? Because, they tend to, people look at that and think, oh, they're naughty or the behaviour, but that's the tip of the iceberg. What that comes from is the frustration and despair of being young and not being able to cope, because there are lots of cognitive impairments and things going on. And it's hard enough for any child to be told to sit still in class and not fidget, not be distracted, and stay on task and be organised. It's really hard, but for an ADHD child, it's virtually impossible. And so added into that, you get the frustration and despair. So what you're seeing are little pressure cookers, and the way that manifests itself often, there is sort of anger and frustration, but it's internal. So that's why it's so important to get early diagnosis.
You know that only too well, don't you, from your own experience?
Yes, absolutely. Well,
you were one of those children.
Well, there was a relative of ours was diagnosed with it, and so I then went back to my own childhood, and I thought, oh yes, a lot of that just forgetfulness, a lot of that disorganisation, restlessness, irritability. I mean, well, think about what you're like when you're stressed. What are you like when you're stressed?
Forgetful.
Yeah.
Overwhelmed.
Yeah. All of that going
Grumpy.
on. Yeah, grumpy. Well, all of that's going on in a child. Imagine being in an open plan office, okay, with your computer on, your phone's on, you've got Instagram, you've got WhatsApp, you've got Snapchat, and every time a message comes through, that's beeping. You've got somebody behind you's got a radio on, somebody in front of you's got a radio on, you've got a television in the background. You try and cope with that, and that's what's going on in these young minds. And so what happens? They're seen as being disruptive because they can't cope, so they get excluded, and that leads on to confrontations both at home and in the classroom. And they can easily fall out of the system. People talk about going from classroom to courtroom, and that's why people think about it being a behavioural thing. But that's the consequence of it, and the consequences are frightening, because I think there's just been a study at Imperial College that Susan Young has done, looking at around the world, 30% of people in young offenders institutions have ADHD.
Well, I was going to ask you about whether we're getting better at helping people. Part of it being diagnosis. How are we doing?
Well, we are. Well, just this week, there's been a lot of concentration on mental health, which has been really, really good. And I think people are beginning to pick up. There's been a lot of work because ADHD is part of the spectrum, which includes dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, Asperger's. By the way, a diagnosis of ADHD also recognises that 70%, 7 out of 10 of these kids who have ADHD will have something else going on, whether it's dyslexia, dyspraxia, Asperger's, any of these things. So there's a lot going on. And I think it's a bit of a Cinderella now, but people are coming to recognise it. GPs are coming to recognise it a little bit more. And I think it's kind of a condition, not a disorder. I call it attention surfeit, really, because there's too much going on. And in my own case, part of me doesn't mind that. In some sense, it's my best friend and my worst enemy, because I'm distracted, and it's difficult to keep concentrating. Even now, there's lots of pathways I could go down even while we're talking. I get easily distracted, but also it helps me make those connections and think of some of the brightest people like will.i.am, Emma Watson, Robbie Williams. All of these there must be footballers out there. There must be other public figures out there, whether they're footballers, politicians. I look at Boris Johnson. I look at that chaotic exterior, and I wonder inside if there's not a certain amount of attention deficit going on. And in a sense, we'd like these people to come forward to help this public recognition.
My next guest, Hillary, has 3 beautiful young daughters. Everything seemed picture perfect until 3 months ago, when she received news that her 7-year-old was diagnosed with ADHD. Now, Hillary says she is at a loss on how to help her little girl and wonders if she could have prevented her daughter's disorder. Take a look. Well, Hillary is here with us, and also joining us is our very good friend, welcome back this season, Dr. Frida Lewis Hall, Chief Medical Officer of Pfizer. So, welcome. Hillary, prior to her diagnosis, were there signs that something was going on with your 7-year-old?
Yes, she was very fidgety, couldn't sit still, couldn't focus, would fight with her sisters a lot.
Yeah, and siblings do that, of course. And you mentioned that you really feel guilty about your child's ADHD and are kind of wondering if this is your fault.
I feel like it's my fault. Like I'm guilty. There's something I could have done different. Like people think I'm a bad parent.
From a medical standpoint, does parenting have anything to do with a child developing ADHD?
I really want to say first to Hillary that attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or what we call ADHD, is not the result of poor parenting. Is not the result of poor parenting. It's also not the result of common misconceptions like, oh, I let them watch too much television, or they play too many video games, or eat too much sugar. So this is a real medical condition, and it's a common one. About 11% of children school-aged in the United States, so that's ages 4 to 17, are diagnosed with ADHD. That makes it one of the most common brain disorders that affects young children.